Linnea was gathering winterberries in the forest when she heard the sound that would change her life forever. It was not the howl of a wolf announcing a kill or calling to its pack. It was something far more disturbing. A low, agonized whine that spoke of pain beyond bearing, of a creature suffering and alone. She should have turned around, should have returned to her small cabin on the edge of Wolfsbane territory, and pretended she had heard nothing. Injured wolves were dangerous, and Linnea was just a human healer living on the fringes of Packland, tolerated because her skills were occasionally useful but never truly accepted. But Linnea had never been good at ignoring suffering, regardless of the risk to herself. So she followed the sound deeper into the winter forest, her basket of berries forgotten, her hand tight around the small knife she carried for harvesting herbs. She found him in a clearing where the snow had been churned into a bloody mess. A massive wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, lay on his side among the crimson-stained white. 3 arrows protruded from his body, their black shafts stark against his pale gray fur. His breathing was labored, each exhale producing a cloud of condensation in the freezing air. His eyes, a startling amber gold, tracked her approach with a mixture of wariness and what looked almost like hope. Linnea stopped at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding. This was no ordinary wolf. His size alone marked him as a shifter, and a powerful one. Alpha, probably. And those arrows were clearly meant to kill, their positioning deliberate, designed for maximum damage. Someone had tried to assassinate this wolf, and from the way he was struggling to breathe, they were succeeding. The wolf made no move to attack as she approached slowly. He simply watched her, those amber eyes holding an intelligence that confirmed what she already suspected. Shifter, fully conscious, probably in more pain than she could imagine. "Easy," Linnea murmured, the same tone she used with injured animals. "I am not here to hurt you, but those arrows are going to kill you if they stay in. Do you understand?" The wolf's ears twitched forward slightly. Acknowledgement. "This is going to hurt," she warned, kneeling beside him in the bloody snow. "But I need you to trust me. I need you to not bite me while I work. Can you do that?" The wolf huffed out a breath and incredibly lowered his head to rest on his paws. Submission, trust, or possibly just resignation that he was going to die either way. Linnea set down her knife and examined the arrows more closely. They were not standard hunting arrows. The shafts were black wood, expensive and rare. The fletching was white, almost invisible against snow, and when she leaned close to the wounds, she caught a scent that made her blood run cold. Wolfsbane. The arrows had been coated in wolfsbane poison. That explained why such a powerful shifter had not already healed, why he lay here dying instead of simply pulling the arrows out himself. Wolfsbane paralyzed shifters, prevented them from healing or shifting, turned their own enhanced metabolism against them as the poison spread through their system. If she did not act fast, this wolf would be dead within the hour. "Wolfsbane," she said aloud, more to organize her own thoughts than to inform him. "That is why you cannot shift, why you are not healing. I need to remove the arrows and treat the poison, but it is going to be excruciating. Wolfsbane burns coming out almost as much as going in." The wolf's only response was to close his eyes, bracing himself. Linnea retrieved her knife and used it to cut away the fur around the first arrow, the one buried in his shoulder. The shaft had penetrated deep, likely hitting bone. Blood had crusted around the wound, and she could see the telltale black lines of poison spreading beneath his skin. She had treated wolfsbane poisoning before, but never with arrows still embedded. This was going to require pulling the shaft free, then using a poultice to draw out the remaining poison, and she would need to do it 3 times, once for each arrow. On 3, she told the wolf, gripping the first arrow shaft firmly. 1, 2. She pulled on 2, not 3. Better to catch him unprepared than tensed against the pain. The arrow came free with a sickening sucking sound, and the wolf's entire body went rigid. A sound emerged from his throat that was neither howl nor whine, but something caught between the two, pure agony-given voice. Blood welled from the wound immediately, darker than it should be, tainted by poison. Lana pressed her hand against it, applying pressure while she reached for her bag with the other hand. She always carried basic supplies when foraging, and today that preparation might save a life. Her fingers were slick with blood as she worked, making it difficult to grip the small vials and pouches. The wolf's blood was hot against her skin despite the freezing air, and she could feel his pulse through the wound, rapid and thready. He was going into shock, his body struggling to cope with the trauma and the poison simultaneously. "Stay with me," she murmured, working as quickly as her shaking hands would allow. "I know it hurts. I know you want to give up. But you are stronger than this. You can survive." The poultice she made was simple but effective: crushed silverleaf, moon moss, and a paste made from rowan bark. It would draw out poison and promote healing, though it would burn like fire going in. She had seen grown men scream when this mixture touched infected wounds. A wolf with Wolfsbane in his system would experience agony beyond imagining. "This is going to hurt worse than the arrow," she warned, mixing the ingredients with practiced efficiency despite her trembling. "But it will save your life. Bite down on something if you need to. I will not judge." The wolf's jaw clenched, his amber eyes squeezing shut in anticipation. Lana took a steadying breath and packed the poultice into the wound. The wolf's entire body arched, his legs scrabbling at the snow, his jaws snapping at air. The sound he made was pure torture, a keening that made Lana's heart clench with sympathy. But she did not stop, did not pull her hands away. She packed the wound thoroughly, making sure every trace of poison-tainted flesh was covered. When it was done, she sat back on her heels, breathing hard, her hands covered in blood and herbal paste. The wolf was panting heavily, his tongue lolling, foam at the corners of his mouth. But he was still conscious, still fighting. "One down," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the way her hands shook. "2 more to go. You are doing well, better than any patient I have ever treated. Most would have passed out by now." The wolf's ear twitched at her words, and despite everything, his tail gave the faintest wag, acknowledging her praise, even through the pain. The second arrow was in his ribs, dangerously close to his lung. This one would be tricky. If she pulled it at the wrong angle, it could tear something vital on the way out. If she left it in, the poison would continue spreading. Lana examined the entry point carefully, judging the angle, trying to determine the safest path for removal. The wolf watched her with those amber eyes, and she saw understanding there. He knew this one was bad, knew she might kill him trying to save him. "Trust me," she whispered. It was not a command, it was a plea. The wolf closed his eyes again. Trust given. Lana gripped the second arrow, angled it carefully, and pulled in one smooth motion. The wolf's entire body convulsed. Blood sprayed across her dress, her hands, her face. But the arrow came free clean. No tearing, no additional damage beyond what was already done. She worked quickly, packing the wound with poultice, pressing hard to stop the bleeding. The wolf was panting heavily now, his tongue lolling, his amber eyes glazed with pain. But he had not snapped at her, had not tried to escape. He simply endured. The third arrow was the worst. It was buried in his haunch, the thick muscle of his back leg, and it had gone in at an angle that suggested the shooter had been aiming for his spine. Missing that target might have been the only reason this wolf was still alive. "Last one," Lana said, though she was not sure if she was reassuring him or herself. "After this, the worst is over. Just hold on." This arrow resisted. The poison had caused the surrounding tissue to swell, gripping the shaft. Lana had to work it back and forth, each small movement producing a fresh whine from the wolf. Sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cold. Her arms ached. But finally, the arrow came free. More blood, more poultice, more pressure to stop the bleeding. And through it all, the wolf lay still, his breathing labored but steady, his eyes never leaving her face. When all 3 wounds were packed and bandaged with strips torn from her underskirt, Lana sat back in the bloody snow and assessed her patient. He was in bad shape. The poison was still in his system, and it would take time for the poultices to draw it out. He had lost a lot of blood, and shock was a real risk, even for a shifter. "You need shelter," she said. "Warmth. Rest. My cabin is not far, but you are too large for me to carry. Can you walk?" The wolf tried to rise and immediately collapsed back into the snow with a pained yelp. "Right, walking is not happening." Linnea looked around the clearing, mind racing. She could not leave him here. The temperature would drop further after sunset, and there were predators in these woods that would be drawn by the scent of blood. But she could not carry a wolf this size either, unless she made a travois. It would be crude, but it might work. Linnea spent the next hour fashioning a rough sled from fallen branches and her cloak, binding it together with strips of fabric and determination. The wolf watched her work with what she would have sworn was admiration, his tail giving a faint wag when she finally dragged the contraption over to him. "I know this is going to hurt," she said, "but it is this or freeze to death, so I need you to help me get you onto this thing." Between her pulling and the wolf's exhausted efforts to shift his weight, they managed to get him mostly onto the travois. It was not elegant, it was not comfortable, but it would work. Dragging a wolf the size of a small horse through snowy forest was the hardest physical labor Linnea had ever done. Her shoulders screamed, her legs burned. Her breath came in ragged gasps that turned to ice in her lungs. But she did not stop, could not stop, because the wolf on the travois behind her was trusting her to save him. By the time her cabin came into view, Linnea was beyond exhausted. But the sight of home gave her a final burst of energy. She dragged the travois right up to her door, then somehow managed to haul the wolf inside, across her floor, and onto the pile of furs and blankets in front of her fireplace. The wolf collapsed with a groan that sounded almost human. Linnea collapsed beside him, too tired to even stoke the fire properly. They lay there together in the growing dark, both breathing hard, both alive against considerable odds. After a few minutes, Linnea forced herself up. The wolf needed water, needed warmth, needed monitoring for signs that the poison was still spreading. She built up the fire until the small cabin was almost too warm, filled a bowl with water, and held it while the wolf drank, changed his bandages, and reapplied poultice to wounds that were already starting to show signs of healing. And through it all, the wolf watched her with those amber eyes that held far too much awareness, far too much intelligence. Linnea found herself talking to him as she worked, filling the silence with words about her herbs, her work, the village she sometimes visited for supplies. "I should check on you through the night," she said, as she prepared a simple stew for herself. "Wolfsbane poisoning can have delayed effects, but I am not sure where I'm going to sleep if you are taking up my entire floor." The wolf huffed, and Linnea could have sworn he looked apologetic. She ended up sleeping propped against the wall near the fire, close enough to monitor her patient, but far enough not to be in immediate danger if he woke disoriented and aggressive. It was deeply uncomfortable, and she woke several times during the night to check his breathing and reapply poultice. But each time she woke, the wolf was also awake, watching her with those amber eyes, protecting her even in his wounded state. And somehow that made the discomfort worthwhile. 3 days passed in a strange domestic rhythm that Linnea had never experienced before. The cabin that had been her solitary refuge for years was suddenly filled with the presence of another being, and she found herself adjusting in ways both practical and profound. The first day after bringing him home was the most critical. Linnea barely slept, checking his wounds every few hours, monitoring his temperature, watching for signs that the wolfsbane was still spreading despite her poultices. She changed his bandages 4 times that first day, applying fresh herbs each time, relieved to see that the angry black lines of poison were receding rather than advancing. The wolf remained mostly unconscious through those first 24 hours, his breathing shallow but steady, his body fighting the dual battle of poison and injury. But even in his fevered state, he seemed aware of her. His ears would track her movements around the cabin. When she spoke to him while changing his bandages, his tail would give weak thumps against the floor. And when she finally collapsed beside him, out of pure exhaustion, too tired to make it to her own bedroll, he shifted his massive head to rest against her leg, offering comfort, even while unconscious, protecting, even while vulnerable. The second day brought improvement. The wolf woke fully for the first time, those amber eyes clear and alert rather than glazed with pain. Lana celebrated by preparing a proper meal, using the last of her winter stores to make a hearty stew for herself and cooking venison for her patient. She had expected him to eat it raw, as wolves typically did. Instead, he sniffed the meat, looked at her with what she could only describe as judgment, and pointedly turned his nose away. "You are injured," Lana said, exasperated. "You need to eat to regain your strength. I am not a chef, and raw meat is perfectly good for wolves." The wolf's response was to huff dismissively and close his eyes as if her offering had personally offended him. Lana stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "You are the most particular injured wolf I have ever treated. Fine. How do you want it cooked, Your Highness? Lightly seared? Medium? Should I add some herbs to season it properly?" The wolf's tail wagged enthusiastically at the mention of searing, and Lana shook her head in amazement as she returned the meat to her small cooking fire. She had never heard of a shifter maintaining wolf form for this long. Usually they shifted back to human as soon as they were able, seeking the better healing and communication that came with their human form. But this wolf seemed not only content to remain as he was, but was apparently civilized enough to have preferences about food preparation. It was simultaneously amusing and intriguing, making Lana wonder what he would be like in human form. Probably insufferable, she thought with affection, definitely accustomed to getting his own way. By the third day, the wolf was mobile enough to follow her around the cabin as she worked. He watched with fascination as she prepared new poultices, ground herbs with her mortar and pestle, organized her stores of medicinal plants. When she sat by the fire to work on drying roots, he positioned himself beside her, his warmth better than any blanket in the cold cabin. "You know, you could shift back any time," Lana mentioned that evening, her fingers absently scratching behind his ears as they sat together. The gesture had started unconsciously the night before and had quickly become habit. The wolf seemed to crave touch, leaning into her hand whenever she petted him, and Lana found the simple act soothing for herself as well. "I know you are healed enough. The wounds are closing beautifully, and there is no sign of remaining poison. You could return to your pack, let them know you survived." She paused, her hand stilling in his fur. "Though I admit I would miss the company. It has been a long time since I have had anyone to talk to, even if you cannot talk back." The wolf made a low sound in his chest, not quite a growl, but something gentler. He shifted his massive body so his head was resting in her lap, those amber eyes looking up at her with an expression she could not quite interpret. "What?" Lana asked softly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" But of course he could not answer. He simply continued to gaze at her with an intensity that made her heart skip, made her wonder if perhaps he was staying, not because he was still too weak to shift, but because he chose to stay. Because he wanted to be here, with her, in this small cabin that had become a temporary haven for them both. It was almost companionable, peaceful. And Lana found herself dreading the moment when he would finally shift and leave, returning to whatever pack he belonged to, forgetting the human healer who had saved his life. On the fourth morning, Lana woke to find the wolf gone and a man standing in her cabin. She sat up with a gasp, reaching for the knife she kept by her bedroll. But the movement drew the man's attention, and when he turned to face her, Lana found herself frozen by the most intense gaze she had ever experienced. He was tall, powerfully built, with blonde hair that fell past his shoulders, and those same amber eyes that had watched her so intently for 3 days. He wore no clothes, unsurprising given that shifters did not carry spare outfits in wolf form, and Lana tried very hard to keep her eyes on his face rather than noticing the impressive physique on display. "You," she managed, "you can shift again. Thanks to you." His voice was deep, resonant, with an authority that made Lana instinctively want to lower her eyes. "The Wolfsbane is completely purged. I can feel my wolf again, whole and healthy. Good, that is good." Lana stood awkwardly, very aware that she was in her sleeping clothes, that her hair was a mess, that this powerful male was looking at her like she was something precious and rare. "I should get you something to wear, and probably some food. You must be hungry." "Lana." He said her name like it was important, like it mattered. "Do you know who I am?" "A wolf I found dying in the forest." She moved toward her chest of clothes, pulling out a tunic and pants that would be too small for him but better than nothing. "Someone who was ambushed and left for dead?" "Beyond that, no. You never told me." "Because I could not speak." He took the clothes when she handed them to him, but did not put them on. "I am Eric, Alpha King of Wolfsbane Pack and the Northern Territories." Lana's hands froze halfway to gathering her hair back. "Alpha King?" "Yes. I was returning from a diplomatic mission when my escort was ambushed. Everyone else was killed. I was hit with Wolfsbane arrows and left to die, unable to shift, unable to call for help." Eric moved closer, and Lana found herself backing up until she hit the wall. "I should have died in that clearing. Would have died, if not for you." "I just did what anyone would do," Lana said, though her voice shook. "Alpha King." She had been treating the Alpha King like he was a stray dog for 3 days. She had made him sleep on her floor. She had laughed at him for being picky about his food. "No." Eric's hand came up to cup her face, gentle despite his obvious strength. "What you did, very few would have attempted. Wolfsbane arrows are deadly. Removing them without killing me required skill and courage. You risked yourself to save a wolf you did not know, expected no reward, asked for nothing in return." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and Lana's breath caught at the tenderness of the gesture. "You are remarkable, Lana. And you are mine." "Yours?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "My mate." Eric's voice dropped to something almost reverent. "I felt it the moment you knelt beside me in that clearing, the bond snapping into place. You are my fated mate, Lana, the one wolf meant for me above all others." "I am not a wolf," Lana protested weakly. "I am human. We cannot be mates." "You are human now," Eric corrected. "But the mate bond does not make mistakes, and there are ways, if you wish it, to join our world fully, to become what you were always meant to be." Lana's mind reeled. This was too much, too fast. 4 days ago she had been gathering winterberries. Now the Alpha King was standing in her cabin, claiming she was his destined mate. "I need to think," she said. "This is a lot to process." "Of course." Eric stepped back, giving her space. "Take all the time you need, but know this, Lana. I will not leave you unprotected. Someone tried to kill me, and they may try again. Until I find who is responsible, you are in danger simply because you saved me. Will you let me protect you?" Lana wanted to say no, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, that she did not need an Alpha King's protection. But she was not stupid. She had pulled Wolfsbane arrows from a dying wolf. Whoever had shot those arrows would not appreciate having their assassination attempt thwarted. "All right," she said quietly. "You can stay, for now, until the danger passes." Eric's smile was radiant. "Thank you. And Lana? I know you need time to accept the mate bond. But eventually, you will feel it too. And when you do, I will be here, waiting for you to choose me the way I have already chosen you. The next weeks were strange and wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. Eric sent word to his pack, and within a day, Lana's small cabin was surrounded by guards. Warriors in wolf form patrolled the perimeter in rotating shifts, their eyes always scanning the forest for threats. Others in human form stationed themselves closer to the cabin itself, armed and vigilant. At first, Lana found their presence oppressive. She was used to solitude, to the quiet of the forest, to being alone with her thoughts and her work. Having dozens of wolves constantly watching, constantly alert, made her feel caged rather than protected. But Eric was patient with her discomfort. He explained that the ambush had been carefully planned, that whoever wanted him dead had resources and connections. Until they identified the traitors, until every thread of the conspiracy was unraveled, Lana was in genuine danger simply because she had saved him. "They will see you as leverage," he told her one evening, his face grave in the firelight. "A way to control me or hurt me. Humans are more vulnerable than wolves, easier to threaten or harm. I cannot bear the thought of you being targeted because of me." The investigation itself was methodical and relentless. Eric's most trusted warriors began interrogating anyone who had known about his travel route. The ambush had been too precise, too well-timed. Someone within his own pack had betrayed him, had sold information to his enemies. Lana watched as Eric transformed from the gentle companion who helped her gather herbs into the alpha king he truly was. He conducted interrogations in her cabin sometimes, and she saw the iron will beneath his kindness, the authority that made hardened warriors flinch and confess. 3 wolves broke under questioning within the first week. Lower-ranked packmates who had been bribed to share information about Eric's schedule, his route, the size of his escort. They claimed not to know who had hired them, said the messages had come through intermediaries, the payment left in dead drops. But Eric was not satisfied with partial answers. He followed every lead, traced every connection, built a web of conspiracy that reached higher than anyone expected. "My former beta," he told Lana after 2 weeks of investigation, his voice tight with betrayal. "Gareth, he was orchestrating everything. He wanted my position, thought killing me would create enough chaos that he could seize power in the confusion." Lana watched pain flash across Eric's face before he controlled it. "You trusted him." "He was my second in command for 5 years. I thought we were friends." Eric's hands clenched into fists. But apparently power mattered more than loyalty. He recruited 2 other wolves, both from influential families. Together, they planned the ambush, hired the rogues to actually carry out the attack, ensured I would be isolated and vulnerable. "They did not count on me finding you," Lana said quietly. "No. They assumed I would die from the Wolfsbane before anyone discovered my body. The arrows were meant to keep me in wolf form, prevent me from shifting to heal or call for help. It was a good plan." His smile was bitter. "It almost worked." The arrests happened at dawn, Eric leading a force of loyal warriors to take the traitors into custody before they could flee or destroy evidence. Lana waited at the cabin with her heart in her throat, praying that Eric would return safely, that this would finally end the threat hanging over them. When he came back hours later, covered in dirt and looking exhausted but unharmed, Lana threw herself into his arms with relief. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him trembling slightly with reaction. "It is done," he murmured. "They are in custody. The pack is secure. You are safe." But he ordered a full investigation in parallel, determined to find who was responsible and eliminate any remaining threats. He interrogated suspects with the precision of someone who had been betrayed before and would not tolerate it again. He followed leads personally, refusing to delegate the task to anyone else. He helped her gather herbs, carrying her basket, and learning the names of plants. He fixed the leaking roof she had been ignoring all winter. He cooked meals that were far more elaborate than her simple stews, laughing when she teased him about alpha kings knowing their way around a kitchen. And slowly, carefully, he courted her. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with attention and respect, and the kind of partnership Linnea had never imagined possible. He asked her opinion on pack matters, valued her knowledge of healing, listened when she talked about her life, her loneliness, her quiet existence on the fringes of his territory. And he shared his own stories, the burden of leadership, the constant political maneuvering, the isolation of being an alpha king with no mate to share the load. "I searched for years," he told her one evening as they sat by her fire. "Traveled to every pack in my territory and beyond, hoping to feel the bond. I had started to think I would never find my mate, that I was destined to rule alone. And then you got shot with Wolfsbane arrows and ended up on my floor," Linnea said dryly. Eric laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Best assassination attempt anyone ever survived. It brought me to you." He reached for her hand, and this time Linnea let him take it. Over the weeks she had grown comfortable with his touch, with his presence. The mate bond he spoke of was becoming harder to deny. She felt the pull toward him, the rightness when they were together, the way her heart raced when he smiled at her. "Eric," she started, then stopped, unsure how to put her feelings into words. "You feel it," he said softly. "The bond. You are starting to feel it." "Yes," Linnea admitted, "but I am afraid, this world you live in, all the politics and danger and responsibility. I am just a simple healer. How could I possibly be queen?" "The same way you removed poisoned arrows from a dying wolf," Eric said. "With courage, skill, and a heart that refuses to give up, even when the task seems impossible. Linnea, you already saved my life once. I have no doubt you could handle being queen. What if I fail? What if I am not good enough? Then I will be there to catch you, to support you, to remind you of your strength when you forget." Eric lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "That is what mates do. We do not expect perfection. We simply walk through life together, facing whatever comes." Linnea felt tears prick her eyes. "I want this. I want you. But the thought of leaving my cabin, my herbs, everything I know—" "Then do not leave," Eric interrupted. "Keep the cabin. We will visit often. Your herbs and healing work are important. I would never ask you to give that up." He smiled. "Though you might have to treat more patients. Once word spreads that the queen is a skilled healer, everyone will want your help." "Queen," Linnea tested the word. "That is still so strange to think about." "You will grow into it, just as you grew into being the woman who saved an alpha king without hesitation." Eric's expression grew serious. "But Linnea, I need you to understand something. Accepting the mate bond means accepting all of it. The danger, the scrutiny, the enemies who will see you as a weakness to exploit. Are you truly willing to take that on?" Linnea thought about the past weeks, the guards surrounding her cabin, constant reminders that danger lurked close. The reports Eric received daily, cataloging threats and plots. The weight of leadership she saw him carry, never complaining but clearly feeling the burden. And then she thought about the man himself. His kindness when he did not have to be kind. His respect for her knowledge and skills. The way he looked at her like she was precious, not despite being human, but simply because she was herself. The mate bond that pulled her toward him with increasing strength, promising a partnership unlike anything she had ever imagined. "Yes," she said firmly. "I am willing. I choose you, Eric. I choose the bond. I choose all of it." The smile that broke across Eric's face was like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Linnea felt the mate bond surge between them, finally acknowledged by both sides, completing with a warmth that filled her entire being. "Thank you," Eric whispered against her hair. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for being brave enough to choose this." "Thank you for being patient," Linnea whispered back. "For letting me come to this decision in my own time. For not pushing. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the fire crackled and the guards patrolled outside. And for the first time since her parents died, Linnea felt like she had found home. Not a place, but a person. Someone who would stand beside her through whatever came next. 2 months after that night, Linnea stood in the great hall of Wolfsbane Pack's main territory, wearing a gown of silver and white, her platinum hair elaborately styled, a crown of moonstone resting on her head. The journey to this moment had not been easy. The weeks between accepting the mate bond and the formal ceremony had been filled with lessons and challenges that tested Linnea in ways she never expected. There were etiquette lessons from Luna Astrid, Eric's aunt, who was kind but exacting in her instruction. Linnea had to learn how to walk in formal gowns, how to address nobles from different territories, how to navigate the complex hierarchies and protocols of pack society. She stumbled through mock ceremonies until her feet ached, practiced polite conversation until her face hurt from smiling, memorized lineages and alliances until her head spun. "You are doing well," Eric would tell her on the evenings when she collapsed exhausted and frustrated, convinced she would never measure up. "Better than you know. The nobles already respect you." "They fear you," Linnea corrected. "They tolerate me because rejecting me means defying you." "Some, yes," Eric admitted, "but others genuinely admire you. Elder Mata told me yesterday that you have more natural dignity than queens she has served who were born to the position. And when you helped heal those pups last week, after that accident in the training grounds, you won hearts, Linnea. Wolves saw you use your healing skills without being asked, without expecting recognition or payment. That matters." There had been opposition too. Lord Stefan, an influential noble, had publicly questioned the wisdom of a human queen. "She has no wolf," he argued in council, his voice carrying through the hall. "How can she lead wolves when she cannot shift? When she does not feel the pack bonds that connect us?" Linnea had wanted to shrink back, to let Eric handle the objection. But she forced herself to stand and speak, her voice clear despite her nervousness. "You are correct, Lord Stefan. I have no wolf. I was not born to this world. But I have studied your ways, learned your customs, committed myself to serving this pack with everything I have." She met his eyes steadily. "And I would argue that sometimes an outside perspective is valuable. I see things you might miss because they are so familiar to you. I ask questions that need asking. And I care about every wolf in this pack, regardless of rank or status, because I know what it is like to be on the outside looking in." The hall had been silent for a long moment. Then Elder Mata stood, her ancient voice carrying authority. "The girl speaks wisdom. Perhaps we have needed someone who sees with fresh eyes for a very long time." It had not won everyone over, but it had been a start. And slowly, grudgingly, more wolves began to accept that their Alpha King's mate might actually be capable of being their queen. The formal mating ceremony was an elaborate affair, with representatives from allied packs filling the hall, all come to witness their Alpha King finally claim his mate. The hall itself was magnificent, far grander than anything Linnea had imagined. Massive timber beams soared overhead, carved with intricate wolf designs. Torches blazed in iron sconces, their light reflecting off ice crystals embedded in the walls. Hundreds of wolves filled the space, all dressed in their finest, all watching as she entered. Eric stood at the altar in formal attire, looking every inch the powerful Alpha King, his amber eyes never leaving Linnea's face as she walked toward him. Despite all the opposition they had faced, all the wolves who had questioned this union, he looked at her with such obvious love and pride that Linnea felt her nervousness melt away. The ceremony itself was beautiful, full of ancient words and ritual gestures that bound them together before pack and witnesses. But for Linnea, the most important moment came when Eric took her hands and spoke vows that were not part of the formal ceremony. "I promise to value your healing work as much as any pack business. I promise to respect your knowledge and your skills. I promise to share the burden of leadership rather than shouldering it alone. And I promise that every day for the rest of our lives, I will be grateful that you found me dying in that clearing and chose to save me." Linnea felt tears slip down her cheeks as she responded with her own vows. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever challenges come. I promise to use my healing skills to serve our pack. I promise to be brave enough to walk this path with you, even when it scares me. And I promise that I will never regret the day I removed those poisoned arrows and found my mate." The hall erupted in howls of approval as Eric kissed her, sealing their bond before the assembled packs. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and drink and wolves from across the territory coming to offer their congratulations. But eventually, Eric and Linnea escaped to their private chambers, finally alone, after a day of public ceremony. Linnea collapsed onto their bed with a groan, kicking off the formal shoes that had been pinching her feet all day. "Remind me why we could not just have a simple ceremony at my cabin," she asked. Eric laughed and joined her on the bed, pulling her against his side. "Because you are queen now. Queens do not have simple ceremonies. They have elaborate affairs with hundreds of witnesses and formal protocols. Being queen is exhausting." "You were magnificent," Eric said seriously. "Every wolf in that hall could see your strength, your grace, your capability. You already command respect, Linnea. You are going to be an extraordinary queen." "With an extraordinary mate to support me," Linnea said, turning to face him. "We are in this together, right? That is what you promised." "Together," Eric confirmed. "Through everything: political intrigue, assassination attempts, difficult pack members, whatever comes our way. You and me, facing it as partners." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Did I mention I found out who was responsible for the ambush? My former beta and 2 other wolves who wanted to seize power. They are in custody, awaiting trial." "Good," Linnea said firmly. "They tried to kill you. They tried to prevent this." She gestured between them. "They failed, and now everyone will know what happens to wolves who threaten the Alpha King and his mate." Eric's eyes gleamed with pride. There she is. The fierce queen I knew was hiding under all that healer gentleness. "You are going to terrify our enemies, Linnea." "Only the ones who deserve it," Linnea said. "For everyone else, I will be the healer queen who tends their wounds and teaches their healers and makes sure no wolf in our territory dies from injuries that could have been prevented." "And that," Eric said, "is exactly why you are perfect for this role. You will rule with both strength and compassion. The kind of leadership our pack desperately needs." Linnea settled against him, feeling the mate bond hum with contentment between them. 4 months ago, she had been a lonely healer living on the fringes of pack territory. Now, she was queen, mated to an alpha king, with purpose and partnership, and a future that stretched bright and full of possibility. All because she had followed the sound of a wounded wolf's cry and chosen to help rather than turn away. All because she had been brave enough to remove poisoned arrows from a dying stranger, never knowing he would become her mate, her partner, her everything. "Worth it," she murmured, half asleep already. "All of this. Completely worth 3 arrows and a lot of blood." Eric's chuckle rumbled through his chest. "Highest praise I have ever received. I am worth 3 Wolfsbane arrows. And the blood," Linnea reminded him sleepily. "Do not forget the blood. There was so much blood." "I will never forget," Eric promised, his voice dropping to something softer, more reverent. "I will never forget the human healer who knelt in bloody snow and saved the Alpha King's life without hesitation, who pulled poisoned arrows from my flesh and asked for nothing in return, who gave me shelter and care, and eventually her heart." He pressed another kiss to her hair. "You are my miracle, Linnea. My unexpected, impossible, perfect miracle. And I will spend every day of our lives making sure you never regret choosing to save me. Linnea was already asleep, exhausted from the day's ceremony, comfortable in her mate's arms. But even in sleep, she smiled, because she knew she would never regret it. Would never regret the moment she heard a wounded wolf's cry and chose compassion over safety. That choice had brought her everything she never knew she wanted. A mate who valued her, a position that gave her purpose, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. She had removed poisoned arrows from a dying wolf, and in return, the Alpha King had claimed her as his mate and queen. It was, Linnea thought, as she drifted deeper into sleep, a fair trade. What did you think of Linnea and Eric's story? Have you ever helped someone without knowing how much it would change your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you loved this tale of the healer who saved the Alpha King and became his queen, hit that subscribe button and join our pack. New stories drop every week, each one celebrating wolves who find their mates in the most unexpected ways, healers who become queens, and the courage it takes to help a stranger, even when it is dangerous. Remember, sometimes the most extraordinary destinies begin with the simplest choice to show compassion when no one is watching. Did you want part 2? Let me know in the comments.